Hi, Mitty.
Hi, Michelle.
Are you ready to get started?
I'm so ready.
This is the Via podcast, dedicated to exploring the American West.
I'm Mitty Hicks, and I'm a travel writer based in the Midwest.
And I'm Michelle Donati from AAA. We represent more than 6 million members across the West. I'm currently enjoying experiencing the West as a mom to 3 boys who are always up for an adventure.
Now, if you're somebody like me who needs to get out West more,
or if you've lived here your entire life, like me,
we have some incredible stories with some of the most fascinating people who live out West.
And share some travel experiences that will hopefully inspire you and your upcoming adventures.
So, Michelle, I've been following you a lot on Instagram, and one thing that is sticking out, you are always so busy.
My family is always on the go. We are always on the road.
I saw that. So tell me, what did you do with the kids this week?
My kids competed in their first triathlon, which
yay,
is crazy. But I think what we're most excited about is getting some road trips planned for this summer. I've grown up reading about and exploring Route 66, but on today's show, we're going to talk about a lesser known road, maybe also the loneliest road, known as Highway 50.
Ooh, I'm excited. Okay. What do you know about Highway 50?
Well, I know it was a part of a Life article back in the 80s, and that's when it was dubbed the loneliest road in America. I think it's really interesting that in that article, a AAA spokesperson said, this is a totally empty road. There are no points of interest. And here we are 40 years later doing an entire podcast episode on Highway 50.
I'm so excited to introduce our guest for today. Richard Moreno is a former newspaper reporter and publisher of Nevada Magazine. His life and career have wandered along Highway 50 for nearly 4 decades.
He's also the author of several books, including The Roadside History of Nevada. In 2007, he won the Nevada Writers Hall of Fame Silver Pen Award.
Richard Moreno, welcome to the Via podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm from the Midwest, and I've heard Nevada pronounced so many ways. Is it Nevada, Nevada, Nevada?
No, it's Nevada.
I've been saying it right.
Yeah, no, it's only people from the East Coast that call it Nevada.
And no one calls it Nevada.
No, well, they do if you're in Missouri. That's a town in Missouri, Nevada, Missouri, Mark Twain land.
Can you just tell our listeners, you have this very interesting start to Highway 50. Can you please enlighten us?
It all started in 1986 Life magazine, and they were running a special issue called America the Beautiful, devoted to all the things that are unique around the United States. In the middle of that issue, they had this big 2-page spread. It was a beautiful photograph of a cowboy riding across a lonely stretch of highway with mountains, and it said that this was Highway 50. And they called it the loneliest road in America. And they said the 287-mile stretch of Highway 50 between Fernley and Ely was not only the loneliest road in America, but was only home to a handful of coyotes, some ghost towns, and you basically needed survival skills to travel the road. At the time, the people that lived out in the little towns, they were offended.
Mm-hmm.
They live out
there.
And so I was working for the Nevada Commission on Tourism at the time. And my boss came to me and he said, hey, we need to combat this somehow. And so I worked with the towns out there and we decided to make fun of it, have a good time. So we created the Highway 50 Survival Kit. We tried to make it look as generic as possible, kind of like the old, that stenciled look that they had in air raid shelters or something during the Cold War. And inside we had a map that showed Highway 50 and we created a game. You stopped in each of the 5 places along the way that were in that stretch, and we gave stamps to the businesses in those communities. The stamp would say, I survived, next to the name of the town. And so we did this. It was a gimmick. We thought, well, we'll put it out there. We printed 500 of these things. There was also a brochure I wrote that was basically a kind of a description of all the towns and the things along the way. And it's a as we'll talk about, it's a wonderful route. It's one of the most historic in the state because it's the old Pony Express, and then it was the Overland Stagecoach route. These towns are little mining towns that all have, each individually has its own, unique and colorful history. And there's a lot of geology out there. And so we were really fortunate in many ways that they made fun of Highway 50 in Life magazine because there's a lot out there. There are other roads, and I don't want to name names because I don't want to say that, but that are far lonelier, I think, and it would have been more of a challenge to come up with things to make fun.
Sure.
Perhaps a topic for another podcast, Rich.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, we did this. We did the 500. They were gone in a month.
Oh, wow.
And this thing just took off and it became very successful. And this was in 1986. We did this. You can still contact the state tourism department and get a Highway 50 survival kit to this day.
That's crazy.
Well, that's something we'll have to put on our checklist. So that was over 40 years ago, and some things have changed since then, but some things have stayed the same because you can still get the survival guide. But can you tell us how Highway 50 has changed over the years?
Well, I do think there's more traffic. I don't want to take credit for it with that, but we really promoted the heck out of trying to make it less lonely. And we were also really happy the way the towns embraced it.
Mm-hmm.
If you go through Eureka, for instance, there's a big billboard that says the loneliest town on the loneliest road. If you're in Fallon, they have a sign that says they have the loneliest museum on the loneliest road. The state did put markers out there along the way telling people they're traveling on the loneliest road in America. And it was officially designated by the legislature.
Wow.
About a year after we started this campaign. Probably the main things that have occurred is that there's been a little bit more economic development in some of these towns.
Mm-hmm.
One of the nice things I think Eureka County has done is that they put it back into infrastructure. So they've been able to fix up their old opera house, fixed up a lot of historic buildings in the town. And then I've seen some newer motels that have opened. And so there are some things that have been happening like that. I do think at the same time, it's retained that kind of unique flavor, and it really hasn't changed that much in the 40 years. When you're driving out there, it's not unusual that you will see big scenic vistas where there's no cars coming in either direction.
Can you tell us where Highway 50 is located?
It's right across. If you were to cut a line through the middle, the center of Nevada, that's Highway 50. To the north, you have Interstate 80, which is kind of the big road where all the trucks are.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the south, you've got 15 and some other highways that go through Las Vegas. But 50 cuts right through the middle of the state, really the heartland of Nevada.
What is the drive like?
It's beautiful. I mean, you can see the weather coming when you're out there. When you look, and if there happens to be rain, you can see it falling on one side of a valley and it's dry and sunny on the other side. And it's just really spectacular scenery.
Mm-hmm.
The state of Nevada actually has over 314 separate mountain ranges. It's the most in terms of number of ranges, not necessarily the highest, but number. It's the most mountainous state. And most of the mountain ranges run in a north-south kind of direction. And so when you're on 50, you're going over all these different mountain ranges. So it's a way to experience what they call the basin and range, where you travel these wide open valleys and then you climb up into these mountain ranges and then drop back down on the other side in another wide open valley. It's not like super forested, although when you get into the mountains, you will run into junipers and some pine and
Mm-hmm.
pinyon and things like that. There's sagebrush all the way across most of there and then different native grasses. It's just this place of solitude, but also of peace, at least to me.
I love that Nevada embraced this and they really said, you know what, we're going to take these lemons, we're going to turn them into lemonade. And 40 years later, that lemonade is still being served on Highway 50. So we're going to drive Highway 50. How many days do you recommend for that drive?
I think you could do it in like 3 days, with spending, overnight in one or two of the towns along the way. If you were to start from the west, you would come in through Carson City, which is Highway 50 actually runs to Carson City. It just wasn't slammed by Life magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't included.
So if people are going to start the drive, do they typically start in Carson City or might they start on the other side of the state?
Yeah, if you came the other direction, you'd come in from Utah.
Okay.
And you'd pass probably through like Delta, Utah and on 50, and then you'd hit Baker, Nevada, right on the border. Baker's kind of a quaint little town. It's the gateway to Great Basin National Park.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And one of the things that we were really fortunate when we were doing this whole promotion too was in 1987, I think it was. President Reagan signed the law that created Great Basin National Park. So we also had a park to promote that was on. It's not, again, technically that 287-mile stretch, but it's another 80 miles or 100 miles up the road. You get to Great Basin National Park. It's the only national park in Nevada. So it gave us something new to promote.
Sure. That said, isn't Great Basin, it's one of the lowest visited national parks in the country.
It is.
So would you also say it's the loneliest national park?
I've never been to Alaska, so I'm not sure, but I'd say it's got to be up there as far as one of the least visited and loneliest.
Okay.
But it's certainly worth a visit. Great Basin is a wonderful place. You have bristlecone pine trees there. Some are 2,500, 3,000 years old. They're the oldest living things besides, I guess, fungus, bacteria, something like that. You also have Lehman Caves, which are these beautiful limestone caves that you can take tours of. And then there's a whole lot of hiking that you can do through there and see some really beautiful aspen and pines and, just beautiful trees and scenery.
I love that. Well, since we're on this topic, you spent nearly 4 decades just really getting well acquainted with the loneliest road. What would you say are just some must-sees or like you must do this when you go?
Well, Great Basin National Park is always on my list.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you continue driving from the park on 50 into Ely, Ely is the home of the Nevada Northern Railway. And I would definitely take a little trip on the railroad. It's an old mining railroad short line railroad that was built in about 1905. And it operated until the 1970s by a copper company. And it used to basically run between the big open pit mines out in Ruth, outside of Ely. It would take people through Ely and actually had passenger travel on it for many years. And then it went through kind of north and connected up with the Southern Pacific line. So it would bring the ore up to the north. Mm-hmm. But they've restored parts of the line and you can take a trip on it. And it's just fun. It's an old-fashioned railroad, and they've been constantly kind of reworking it. The museum site where the railroad is housed is kind of cool. What makes it unique is that when the railroad company went under, they basically just sent everybody home one day, like on a Friday, locked all the doors, and then let it sit until it became acquired by a local nonprofit. So everything is original and nothing's been touched. They still have all the records, the desks, everything.
Oh, wow.
The first time I went in there, which would have been in the 80s, you could still find people's, I'm sure they've cleaned it up now, but their lunch buckets and things just sitting around.
Oh my gosh.
Nothing had changed. It's like they literally just went home.
It's like time stood still.
Yeah.
And then they got a message say, don't come back. Oh. So it's really one of the best preserved working railroads, I think, in the West. So that's definitely one of the highlights.
Nice.
You talked about Highway 50, it's untamed. Some of the words that you use, peaceful, scenic, solitude. And so it makes me think that you're going to get some pretty good dark skies there. Mm-hmm. I read about a sunset and stars train ride. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about the dark sky community along Highway 50?
Definitely. One of the reasons is that the town of Ely, if you look on a map, is one of the communities in the United States that's farthest from a metropolitan area.
Oh, wow.
The train will go like north of Ely, and there you can just kind of look up in the sky where you're taking the train and enjoy those, those skies that are unblemished by light.
Uh-huh.
I think the next town is Eureka, and I've always liked Eureka. The Eureka Opera House is one of those historic buildings that's been restored, and they do a lot of concerts and performances and things. And then there's a small museum, the Eureka Sentinel Museum in town, which was in the old newspaper office. And they actually have the press, and I guess it was a tradition there that when they printed billboards or things for like performances, they would post them on the walls inside the newspaper office. And they're still there. I mean, they're kind of peeling, but they're some are 80, 100 years old.
And they're still there.
Yeah.
They're so proud.
Oh, wow.
And so the museum is kind of a cool little side trip. They've got a little bed and breakfast. I think it's called the Colonnade there. There's a few motels and there's some nice restaurants in Eureka. So if you were to be coming and you spent part of the day at Great Basin National Park. You might spend the night in Ely, or if you really want to take a ride on the railroad, or you could hump it all the way to Eureka and stay there.
Mm-hmm.
If you continue on 50, then you get to Austin, would be the next place. But before you get to Austin, a kind of a nice little side trip is a place called Hickson Summit. And it's a Bureau of Land Management site. You can park, and there's a restroom there, which is kind of nice, like a pit toilet.
Mhm.
But it's got Native American petroglyphs.
Oh.
And it's one of the best places in the state where, no one really knows what petroglyphs represent. They think they might be related to hunting or some kind of religious meaning or fertility. I've heard all kinds of different versions. But what's nice about Hickson is at the top of the summit, it's basically like these cliffs along, and then there's an opening, and you can see where deer or other animals would travel from one valley over to another through this little opening. And it would make sense that if you were going to hunt, that this would be a great place to just kind of camp out. And if you were bored, you might start, scratching some petroglyphs.
Mm-hmm.
Hickson Summit has some really nice examples of petroglyphs that have been preserved. And then if you're really adventurous.
Uh-oh.
We are rich. We are here for the adventure.
I think so.
All right. Well, there is a place, if you're driving, before you start taking the summit up to go into the mining town of Austin. It's in a valley called Monitor Valley. I think it's State Highway 318. You take a left, and then you can see a sign for a historic marker that says Takima Cave. And if you head up this dirt road, it's somewhat washboarded. And so that's why I said if you want to take an adventure, and you drive about 5 or 6 miles, there's and off to the side, you can usually see like the texture of the dirt is whiter. It's actually kind of white like alkali.
Oh, interesting.
There's a natural hot springs there.
Ooh.
And so you can kind of pull off the road and climb in and,
Take a dip?
take a dip. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's called Spencer Hot Springs. There's not really any signage, but people have built like little wooden deck around the side of it. And there's a way to control the heat using the sandbag. So if it's too hot, you close off the water coming in.
That is awesome.
Test it first. Make sure it's not
Sure.
too hot.
Sure. Good tip. Pro tip.
What do you think that people will gain from this experience? Because as Michelle said, it's probably not for everyone. I mean, what do you gain from going on this adventure?
And who is it for?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways to answer that. One is if you like nature and you like to see things as close to the way that they have been for a long, long time, then this is a drive for you. In many parts, it's really relatively untamed still and unblemished. And then there's a variety of environments because you're going, 300 plus miles across the state. When you drive, for instance, through Fallon, that area there is where there's the remnants of a prehistoric lake, Lake Lahontan. And so you have a place like Sand Mountain, which is a 600-foot high, I think it's a 2-mile long sand dune that people ride their, dune buggies on. They can actually do sand surfing where you can, go down the slopes of it on a sand board.
That sounds so fun. Have you done that?
I've never done it.
My kids would love that.
I actually watched a competition. They actually have people go out and compete.
A competition?
Yeah, to see how far you can slide, when you come down. I never saw it, but apparently when people started doing it, they used hoods of old cars that they stood on and slid down the mountain on. Now they have these like sophisticated boards that have, super wax on it.
Aerodynamic.
Responds to it. Yes, exactly. But it's even just fun to go to. There's also at Sand Mountain, there's an old Pony Express, the remnants, ruins of a Pony Express station, probably one of the best preserved. And the reason it's best preserved is that the sand covered it for about 80 years.
Wow.
And then it wasn't until the 1970s that they went in and they moved the sand out and you could see the walls and all the things that were at Sand Springs. was the name of the station that was there. And so you have that drier environment at that end, and alkali flats. There's areas where you just look and it's just, it's all white with salt. And then you can continue and get into a different terrain where it's a little higher elevation, and you get the pinyon trees and the junipers and the pines and some of the others.
So this is a road trip for people who really want to be up and close with nature. Is that what it sounds like?
Right. That would be one.
It may be history.
Right. And then that was a second. When I mentioned there were several. The other is, if you're into history, I mentioned the Pony Express a couple of times. There are several other places along the way where there are remnants of old overland stagecoach stops. There's actually a fort that was made out of clay that they have kind of maintained in a state of arrested decay at Fort Churchill, which is right off of 50, right near Fallon. And it's a state park now, but it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you're into photography. The ruins are beautiful, especially in the late afternoon. You get the light on it, etc. As far as other places, of course, the mining towns. Each town, Austin has a little museum. Eureka has a museum. Ely has a larger museum to visit. And of course, they have the railroad, which has its own museum. And so from a historical standpoint, Ely and Austin are definitely worth checking out. People who like to go ghost towning will also go off the road and find there's ruins of places that are off the road if you know where to look. There's a number of books that are ghost town guidebooks that you can buy.
Do you actually need survival skills, or is this drive really more mental than anything else?
I think you're onto something. I think it is more mental. You don't need survival skills to do this drive. What I think you do need is to just have an open mind about expanse, because there are just stretches that will go for 50, 60 miles where you're not going to see a McDonald's. You're actually not going to see a McDonald's anywhere out there, but you're not going to see any kind of roadside service. I will say the highway department has put signs up to say next service is, 77 miles. So you have a warning, but I think it's more of a mental thing. As you mentioned, things have changed. I don't think it's really that difficult to drive. I will tell you an experience I had where this is a number of years ago. I was taking someone out to a ghost town near Gabbs, which is, if you were to go Highway 50, and then you head south like you're going down to Tonopah, there's a little place called Gabbs. There's a state park down there, Berlin Ichthyosaur State Park, where they have a ghost town that's preserved, and also an enclosure where they have found the remains of prehistoric ichthyosaurs. And all the bones you can make out, it's something like 40 ichthyosaurs all piled on top of each other. There was like a mass grave.
Oh, wow.
Where they think it might have been they were trapped in maybe an inlet as the sea was drying up, the old, the inland sea that was there once. Or they all ate something, got botulism and died. And no one really knows why. There's so many. But anyway, I was going out there and we saw a sign for a town called Broken Arrow. And my friend I was with said, hey, let's check that out. So we tried to drive this road. And this is just a cautionary tale. We ended up not finding it, deciding to turn around, but then deciding to turn around in what we didn't realize was a dry creek bed. It was all sand. And so the vehicle was just a 2-wheel drive car, got stuck. And so we had to hike out to the main road, hitchhike into Gabbs with a truck driver, and then call AAA. So they're in Fallon.
I love it.
And they came out with a 4-wheel drive tow truck to pull our car out. So there's my cautionary tale.
So you need 4-wheel drive.
You need 4-wheel drive and you need AAA.
And when you go off of the main roads, just make sure you know what you're doing.
No, that's a great tip. I have a question to ask you, Rich. This comes from an email that we received from AAA member Miguel Frutos in California. He wrote, we took Highway 50 on our way back from Colorado. It's a ghostly highway with no cars in front or behind you for miles and miles. Those open roads were a welcome sight juxtaposed to the freeways of LA. until we encounter the crunching under our tires of some strange insect covering the highways.
Ooh.
We wanted to stop, but we were afraid that the bugs would climb all over the car. It was definitely one of the strangest experiences and sights to see on Highway 50.
Okay, yeah, I do know what he's talking about.
What is he talking about?
It's not just Highway 50. So there are these bugs that, on particularly dry, when Nevada experiences a series of particularly dry years, these crickets, they're called Mormon crickets. They live buried in the ground, kind of like cicadas.
It sounds like a cicada.
These are more like locusts, and they will come out like hordes of them. They cover the roads. They eat the paint off of houses. They're usually more to the north. I think their area is probably increasing. But yeah, that's what he's talking about. And they are they're big. They're big and they're ugly.
I'm looking at pictures right now. What do we need to survive these crickets?
Don't get out of your car. They're seasonal.
Okay.
It's more of a warm weather, summer kind of thing. In the winter, you don't see them as much.
It's the crunching that just has me just...
Yeah, I know. This sounds like a horrible thing. I've not really seen them that much on Highway 50. So, I mean, in the context of what we're talking about, I don't really think they're one of the attractions normally. You know, it's just best to kind of leave them alone.
Yes.
Avoid them.
I don't think they don't bite or anything.
Yeah, there's a silver lining.
That's good. That brings up a good point, though, because you said these bugs are seasonal. And I am very interested in Highway 50, but I am very uninterested in these crickets.
Mm-hmm.
And so is there a best time of year to make the drive? And if so, when is the best time? Or is there a time to avoid the drive? And when is that?
Winter is not the best time because there are a number of mountain ranges that you have to go over where the roads can be pretty dicey. Outside of Austin, for instance, the Austin summit gets pretty steep. And so my recommendation is not to do it in the deep part of winter, December, January. I think spring is a good time. For one thing, the wildflowers start blooming, so you can sometimes see that.
Ooh.
If it's a really wet year, there's a lot of wildflowers, particularly in the valley before you get to the town of Austin, Reese River Valley. Same thing in the Diamond Valley area, just before you get into Eureka. So I'd say spring, and then fall can be nice. Fall, I like when you get out to Great Basin National Park, all the aspen turn colors. And if you get the right week, it's just that, those little quakies, aspen, and they're all yellow and some are kind of reddish. And it's so pretty before the leaves fall off.
And the crickets are gone in the fall, right?
Yeah, right. The crickets are gone.
Okay, good.
So spring and fall. I do have another question because earlier you said you won't see a McDonald's, but I'm curious, what can I eat along Highway 50? Because for me, I'm a big foodie. And if I'm going to go on Highway 50 on such a historic drive, I need to know what can I only get on Highway 50?
There is a place when you're driving outside of Fallon and you're on Highway 50 east from Fallon, you're going to hit a place called Middlegate.
Okay.
And Middlegate has the Middlegate Station, and it has the biggest hamburger. It's really famous for its hamburgers, and people actually go out to Middlegate to see the hamburgers. The other thing in Middlegate to visit is just near there is an old tree that's covered with shoes, the shoe tree. Apparently, according to the legend, some newly married couple had an argument. They pulled off under the tree. The husband grabbed the wife's shoes and threw them up in the tree and told her to walk home. And then, he took off and he went to Middlegate. Then apparently he went back and got her after he
had a burger,
thought more about it. And then somehow they made up and they continued on. But
he was hangry.
He was. Yeah, he had one of those hamburgers, made her wait. But no, I don't know the whole story. There's a lot of different versions of the legend. But basically they started it, and then other people saw the shoes in the tree and started throwing their shoes in the tree. And then about 15 years ago, somebody came along and decided to cut that tree down.
Aww.
But because people really love the shoe tree, they adopted a tree near it where the shoe tree was.
Love it.
And so when you drive by, you're going to see this tree in this gully, and it's just packed with shoes. And now last time I was there, it had a pink flamingo in it. I mean, it's all kinds of stuff hanging in this old cottonwood tree. So that's another one of the things to see in Middlegate.
Worth it.
Is to stop in for a second, take a photo of the shoe tree, and throw your shoes up there if you feel like.
But eat first.
I'm looking at the shoe tree now. It's incredible. I've never seen anything like it.
Oh, it's a huge tree.
I'm also looking at this Middlegate burger.
Yes.
Mitty, it's the size of your head.
Really?
It's huge. Yeah, I wasn't.
Sign me up.
Yeah, that's certainly one place, to eat. When you get out to all the way to, I don't know, Eureka has a couple of good places. There's the Owl Cafe. If you just want to get into kind of an old time, meet the locals and have a hamburger or even a salad or something. And in each of these towns, usually I think Austin has like a little nice bed and breakfast there for people who want to spend the night. They had a wonderful spread for breakfast. Fallon's it's a bigger town. There's the Fallon Naval Air Base there, where they filmed parts of Top Gun. And
wow.
So it's a bigger town, 10,000, I think. And they have a McDonald's, but they also have a lot of other options for dining. And then, of course, there's also the casinos that have restaurants that are affiliated with them.
So you won't go hungry on Highway 50.
No, you're not going to be hangry out there.
Especially if you get that burger. Rich, we could talk to you all day long. I have 3 boys. They love collecting rocks.
Sure.
One of the things I read about was Garnet Hill.
Mm-hmm. It's outside of Eureka.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, you can go there and hunt for garnets, which are those kind of reddish stones.
Mm-hmm.
You can find a number of places. My wife is a high school science teacher, loves rocks. So, yeah, she's always finding jasper out there.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yes.
Rich, I have one more question for you. So in that 1986 article, one of the quotes that stuck out to me is this is one of the last opportunities to experience and see living reminders of the vanishing American West. I have to ask you, 40 years later, does that still stand today?
I don't think really life has changed all that much in a place like Austin or a place like Eureka. That solitude and that you can be yourself, that kind of independence that you can have out there. You're also going to run into some colorful folks that live out there because of that. They're able to be themselves. And, if you want to meet them, I say head into one of the little saloons, the International Cafe. They claim they have a ghost in the International Hotel. And actually, one time I was there, they like to pull this little stunt. They have a jukebox that just starts working by itself. And they claim it's the ghost.
That is creepy.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a button. But anyway, they were trying to mess with me.
Oh, I love it. Rich, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you. This has been great fun.
We recently asked AAA members to tell us their stories traveling on Highway 50 across Nevada.
This is my favorite part.
AAA member Mary Gagliardi from California writes, "We visited Great Basin National Park in July 2021 by the way of Highway 50. It's a gorgeous drive. We heard a lot about how it's the loneliest road in America, but I think that's not really true. We encountered other travelers and friendly locals in the towns along the way, and it was a great experience, especially considering it was during COVID. We stopped in Eureka and had lunch at the Opera House. The French dip sandwiches and burgers were excellent. We also stopped in Ely to get groceries before Baker. This is important if you're planning to stay outside the park and want to cook any meals. Baker had a handful of great restaurants, but no serious grocery stores. In Ely, we also saw the historic train. With more time, we would want to ride the train in Ely and stay over in Eureka. And Great Basin had so much to offer. Cave tours, ancient bristlecone pines, fall color if you time it right, lakes to swim in, and Wheeler Peak to summit. It's definitely worth the drive."
Shout out to Mary for this amazing email. It just really, to me, speaks to Richard's point. There's a lot to see on Highway 50. And not to mention, can we just talk about how many people are talking about these burgers? I'm hungry now.
Well, to me, it really reinforces the fact that this is untamed territory that really offers us the opportunity to explore history as it stood many years ago, while also having the opportunity to connect with ourselves and potentially with our families. Mary, thank you so much for your email.
And we want to hear from you.
We love your comments, questions, and especially your stories about travel in the West. Send us an email at viamail@viamagazine.com. Again, that email is viamagazine.com. You can also leave us a voicemail at 415-475-9350. Again, that phone number is 415-475-9350.
And don't be shy. You may hear your voicemail played on the podcast.
The VIA podcast is hosted by Mitty Hicks and Michelle Donati. That's me.
Produced by Whitney Phaneuf, editor-in-chief of VIA, Katie Henry, managing editor of VIA, and editorial consultant Jenna Schnur, alongside Dave Beasing and Jason Jackson of Sound That Brands.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, don't forget to follow and subscribe to the VIA podcast. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Discover more places to travel in the West at AAA.com/VIA. VIA Magazine is published by AAA Mountain West Group.
The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of AAA